Pakistan, Dr. Sania Nishtar.
Prime Minister Imran Khan, Honorable Chief Justice, Health Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by congratulating you for this stellar show of strength in support of a long-neglected public policy agenda, and I want to thank the Chief Justice in particular for lending it the impetus that it needed for a very long time. Dr. Bongard has made a stellar presentation. He's brought to bear the importance of the numbers. I'm not going to repeat them, but I just want to re-emphasize this one number. The doubling time for population in other South Asian countries is 60 years, whereas the doubling time in Pakistan is 30, and that should drive home an important point. The question we have to ask ourselves is a very simple question. Is this sustainable? And what does this mean for development in a context of resource scarcity? As already mentioned by Secretary Health, Pakistan's rampant population growth has already eaten into the modest socioeconomic gains that we've made over the last decades. There is no amount, no magic growth number. There is no increase in energy production capacity. There is no number of water reservoirs that's going to cater to this rising trend. And it is not just the future we have to think about, it is today. We face the crunch today. 4 to 5 million people, a whole new city is added to the country's population. Our schools, hospitals, roads, cities are crumbling under the pressure. The rising population in Pakistan has grave implications for energy security, for food security, for water security. And clearly, in terms of finding a solution to this problem, there are some very important lessons in history. So I'd like to reflect back a little and remind all of us that back in the 60s and for several decades, Pakistan was the world's marvel in population planning. The world is talking about universal health coverage today in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, but Pakistan espoused the universal health coverage goal for family planning 6 decades ago. The world awakened to the importance of public-private partnerships somewhere in the 80s, but Pakistan, in its second 5-year plan, allocated resources for partnering NGOs to deliver this program nationwide. In the 90s, Pakistan was the world leader in social franchising. And over several decades, a number of different governments heavily invested in infrastructure. We built 4,000 family welfare clinics. Billions of rupees were spent in contraceptive procurement. Training institutes were created. Several cadres of human resources were established, especially for population planning. And even today, the only ISO certified warehouse in the public sector is for the population program. But despite this heavy investment, the program, unfortunately, despite its early successes, failed to deliver. And this is a very sobering realization for us. Clearly, the determinants of this failure are rooted in a complex interplay of poverty, of illiteracy, of policy vacillations of inherent governments, of lack of the leaders to stand up in support of the agenda, and rooted in the role of women in the society in general. But overall, the single most important factor which has led to the demise of this program is the institutionalized rent-seeking and corruption which was pervasive in this program, and the disincentives for performance that got very well institutionalized, despite the earlier successes, unfortunately. So clearly, in terms of looking forward, because I think today is a landmark day, this is a historic day, which is from where we will look forward. Clearly, in planning for the future, we cannot repeat the failures of the past. So what do we have to do? And here, there is another important lesson from history, especially from countries, Islamic countries, who've been able to make major strides in population development. Countries like Iran and Bangladesh, we clearly know that there were 3 factors at play. Firstly, there was no single stakeholder which was responsible for the progress, which is why the stellar show of strength today of various stakeholders is critical. Secondly, grounding in evidence for policy was key. And thirdly, there was innovative use of a number of different policy levers from soft to hard. I'll quickly go over some of those policy levers and options that Pakistan has today. But I want to re-emphasize that in the deployment of those levers, in the success of those levers, it is governance and political factors that come into play, and that one of the overarching successes that we can have, not just in this program, but overall, is to make quantum changes in that area. So in terms of the levers, there is always the constitutional lever, because in the current dispensation of the National Finance Commission Award, some provinces have a disincentive to work on this agenda. And of course, the solution to this is political. Secondly, there are a number of legislative levers that we have. Secretary Health already talked about the different laws that are in the pipeline, premarital counseling, and how to enable that through legislation, the right to health, the right to education for women beyond what Article 25A of the Constitution has outlined, and then of course the stipulation of the age of marriage through legislative measures. But here again, it are the governance factors that are the main impediment, because Sindh enacted the Child Marriage Restraint Act in 2013, which was a very progressive step, which actually brought the age of marriage for girls and for men and women both to the age of 18. But what's impeding its full implementation and full enforcement is the patriarchal culture, it is the entrenched behaviors, and of course the weaknesses in monitoring and accountability. In addition to the constitutional and the legislative levers, we of course have the option of using the lever of our partners in the religious leaders, and we have a talk scheduled later today, so I'm not going to talk about that. Then we have the normative levers. Many federal institutions were created whose mandate was to harness the outreach of the private sector. They were mandated to make contraceptives more acceptable to the public, but unfortunately after the 18th Amendment, they fell through the cracks, and the federal government has to make sure that they are revitalized. And then finally, we have the programmatic levers, and that is where we need to think very disruptively. Because Pakistan, even today, has around 4,000 family welfare clinics. And despite the best efforts of many provincial governments, the turnover in those family welfare clinics is less than 2 to 3 a day. We have to think whether we need those family welfare clinics or whether we need to do things in a very different way. Because if you look at experiences across the most marginalized countries in the world, if you look at experiences in sub-Saharan Africa, in Malawi, in Tanzania, in Madagascar, even as close as Bangladesh, you will see that it is digital solutions and mobile apps and digital applications which have been able to plug the issues that we have been talking about for decades. The leaking supply chains and the issue of absenteeism and ghost workers, it is through these digital applications that we have been able, that those countries have been able to solve these problems. Even today, if your children will order a pizza at home, the same supply chains in Pakistan's environment will deliver on the premise of transparency, trackability, but in the same environment, the public sector systems have not created the ecosystems and the environment to enable the deployment of such systems, although Pakistan's telecommunication and technology infrastructure enables us to do that. I mean, in the social sectors, in the health and population sectors, we talk about sending contraceptives and other commodities to far-flung areas. We talk about leakages from supply chains, but Coke and Pepsi and all these consumer items are found in the remotest corners of the country. In Rwanda, drones are used to deliver blood products to hemorrhaging women in far-flung areas. It is quite routine to use drones for delivery of contraceptives and other medicines in humanitarian settings in many parts of the world. And I think what we need to do is to think out of the box and to use these digital solutions and new technologies to overcome the issues that have plagued us for decades. And in the creation of these solutions, it is not just the solutions per se, but also the institutions who have the competency to do that. So today, health and population sectors are not being disrupted by their respective ministries, but a whole new range of institutions. So it is organizations with financial platforms who are partnering with online retail institutions. They are tapping into artificial intelligence-enabled algorithms to overcome workers' shortages and make the whole ecosystem more transparent and delivery-oriented in the process. And we need to make full use of these opportunities which are routine for the private sector and which are routine for other countries who have made quantum strides in social sector delivery. There is a huge opportunity to join the dots between Pakistan's excellent technology infrastructure and the databases that it has invested in and the outreach of the market to create solutions that are totally new generation. And in doing this, we also have to make full use of the resources that are available in the digital domain worldwide. I mean, on the 14th of November, the World Health Organization launched an app which is available free of charge. We talk a lot about the lack of connect between the health and population sectors, but what that app enables us to do is basically to bridge that. So we need to think out of the box for these, for opportunities of this kind. I just, in the end, Prime Minister and Honorable Chief Justice, want to outline 3 points as I finish my talk. There are 3 things that we must do. Of course, we have to think out of the box and do things in a very different way. But then we also have to insulate policy from the vacillations that are inherent to change in governments. And that is where your role is absolutely crucial and important. Secondly, we have to institutionalize mechanisms to hedge against the abuse of government resources, which create a disincentive to do the right thing, and that has been the practice in this country for decades, and which has undermined the integrity and the potential of programs, not just in the population and health sectors, but everywhere, as the Prime Minister is well aware. And thirdly, we must recognize in the planning sector that population is the denominator for development, and that we must not speak just in terms of contraception for women, but that we must talk about the role of women in the society, and that has to do with the broader-based agendas of access, rights, opportunities, and freedom. I'd like to thank you once again, Honorable Chief Justice, for raising this as a human rights issue. And thank you, Prime Minister, for the attention you're according to this.